So far, we went over how to inherit properties. You have a subclass, you have its parent class. How do you get the properties? And we learned that use .call. Now I want to talk about another aspect of inheritance, right? Classes aren't just properties, classes are methods. So let's add a few methods to our B. So from our previous series on instantiation patterns, you should remember that the way we add methods to a class in the pseudo-classical style, the most commonly used style, is we add them to the prototype object on the function. So every function has something called .prototype. .prototype just refers to an empty object. We add all our methods to that empty object. Then, when we use the keyword new, a prototype chain is created between any instance of that class and the .prototype object. What is a prototype chain? It means that, hey, if I can't find a property on myself, I'm going to go look for it on this other object. Again, if you want more detail on that, please watch the previous lessons. So let's add a method called fly. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're adding 10 to the position. Again, this kind of represents movement, position 0, position 10. So flying just adds 10 to the position. If you call fly twice, the B will at position 20. Call it once, the B will be at position 10. Okay, let's add one more method just for fun. B.prototype.buzz. Console.log. Bzz. Okay, now let's just watch this. Let's make a little instance of B and make sure these methods are working. Okay, var my B equals new B. Give it a name, we'll call it Sarah. The color will be blue. Cool, now, two things we should be able to do. One, so we should be able to say myb.fly. Let's put a console log before and after. Console log after, and let's run, make sure there's no other console logs. And let's run this code. Oh. I'm sorry. Console log color doesn't work for multiple arguments. My bad. There we go. So before fly, we have a B called Sarah the B, color blue, position 0. And after the fly, the position is 10. So the fly method is working. But notice there's no fly method directly on this object. That's because it is on B.prototype. If we do B.prototype.fly, we're not going to invoke it, but we'll just see here that it is a function, right? So it's actually on the prototype object, and every instance of B has instructions. Hey, if you can't find your property on yourself, go look on B.prototype. Cool? So, additionally, we should be able to have this B buzz. Let's try that out. Bzz. Ta-da! Pardon the error there. We didn't even need a console log, I just realized, because it has a console log built in. Ta-da! It buzzes. So these methods are working on B, right? We know that. But again, here's the million-dollar question. How do we inherit them on warrior B? How can we take all the methods we added to the B's prototype object and let instances of warrior B have access to them? Well, I have slides for that. Let's pull them up. Okay, so let's just visualize these prototype chains. We have B1. Right, I'll make B1 really fast just so we have it. It's just an instance of B, the B class. Purple. Okay, over B1. And the reason it can do things like fly and buzz is because there's a B.prototype object, and B1 has a prototype chain, right? It knows that if I can't find a property on my own object, I have to go look at the prototype object. And similarly, warrior B also, this is worker B. Let's just pretend worker B says warrior B. Warrior B has a prototype chain to its prototype. There's worker B.prototype and B.prototype, right? But we want worker B to have access to both the worker B.prototype and the B.prototype. So what do? Well, we need one more chain here. We actually build a chain linking worker B.prototype to B.prototype. So how do we do this? Because just to be clear, what'll happen is worker B, like let's say worker B.fly, warrior B.fly. It'll say, do I have a method on myself called .fly? No, I don't. So where do I look? I go look on worker B.prototype. Does worker B.prototype have a method on it called fly? No? Okay. I'm going to go look at B.prototype. Goes all the way up, looks at B.prototype. Does this have a method on it called fly? Yes, it does. Then I'm going to run that method and I'm going to fly. So how do I make this link between worker B.prototype and B.prototype? Well, remember, the way you make a prototype chain is with object.create. Object.create returns an object, so like this is what it returns here, and inside you put another object. Other object. Okay, now how it works is the object on the left has a prototype chain to the object on the right. So the object on the left knows that if it ever can't find a property on itself, it needs to go look in the object on the right. Okay, and just to be super clear on object create, it's not anything magical. It really does simply return an object. See, just an object. Now, I put in a blank object to be the prototype, so the thing that this returns, the object that this returns, delegates its failed lookups to this object. Okay? Now, since we can make a prototype chain that way with object.create, how can we create a link between warrior B.prototype, which is an object, and B.prototype, which is an object? Well, it's really simple. All we say is warrior B.prototype, which is an object, equals object.create B.prototype. Okay? Remember, object.create takes an object and returns a new object that delegates its failed lookups to that object. So these are both objects. Don't be confused with the word prototype and think it's some fancy thing. It's literally just an object. We have an object here. We have an object here. Object.create returns a new object that delegates its failed lookups to B.prototype. So warrior B.prototype becomes a new object that delegates its failed lookups to B.prototype. Okay? This is the $1 million line of code. This is how you inherit methods. So let's comment this out and see what happens on warrior B when we say my warrior B.buzz. Uh-oh, .buzz is not a function. Ah! What do? Well, let's uncomment this out. Bzz, it works. It works. Why? Because we're creating a prototype chain between warrior B.prototype and B.prototype, just like this graph. A warrior B delegates to warrior B.prototype, and now warrior B.prototype delegates to B.prototype. So there's double chains going on. Because just in case you forgot, implicitly in warrior B, what's happening is we're saying this equals object.create warrior B.prototype, right? And then we're returning this. So this is how the first prototype chain is created between worker B1, between any instance of worker B, or warrior B, and between the prototype. Right here, we're saying, hey, every instance of warrior B, delegate to the warrior B.prototype. If you have a failed lookup, go look here. Okay? And then in here, we're creating even one more delegation. We're saying, after you look on the warrior bee prototype, if you still don't find it, look at the b.prototype. Okay, so it's like sort of a double delegation. It's 2 layers. And that's why warrior bees can now use methods like buzz and fly, right? Because they have a prototype chain to their prototype and then to the b.prototype. And that is how you inherit methods, right? So we went over inheriting properties, which you use .call, so that you can pass the instance to the parent class. It decorates with a bunch of stuff. You come back down and you return it. And how do you inherit methods? Well, you build a prototype chain. You tell a warrior bee to first look at the warrior bee prototype, and then if you can't find it there, go look at the bee prototype. Now here's a question. Why do we have to look at the warrior bee prototype first? Why can't we just look at the bee prototype? Because there may be methods that are warrior bee specific. So we can imagine that we have, warrior bee dot prototype dot shout battle cry. Okay, because we added a battle cry property, remember? And this says, console.log color this dot battle cry. Okay, so now if I do my warrior bee, I didn't give it a battle cry. No, it has a battle cry. And then I do dot shout battle cry. Watch what's going to happen. I'm tough. It yells it, right? But remember, B does not have access to this, right? B just has access to the B prototype. So if we make an instance of B, and we say my B.shout battle cry, look what'll happen. We get an error. The warrior bee shouts his battle cry, and my bee doesn't. Why? Because my bee only has access to methods added directly to B, such as fly and buzz, whereas worker bee has access to both methods added to the worker b.prototype and methods added to the b.prototype. That's the idea of inheritance, right? You inherit your specific things you added for this new class and all the functionality from the base class. And that is how you inherit methods. Next, we're going to talk about how this all looks in ES6. Now, this is super, super crucial because React is entirely based on everything we just talked about. Under the hood, React is everything we just talked about, just with different syntax. So next, we're going to walk through the syntax so you can really understand what's going on in your React components.